If you hear some talking in the background, it's a Walmart loudspeaker telling us to go home, wash our hands, and keep our distance. I have to listen to that all day long, every day when they're open. It's pathetic. Anyway, this is not about them. This is about good stuff. So this is a follow-up to the prior video that I made. I'm going to title it the same, just title it Part 2 and change the other one to be Part 1. Oh, what was the title of the other movie? Something about symbolism. Hollywood symbolism in the movies regarding the pyramid shape and UFO power supplies. So it started out about Stargate, and there's the pyramid shape, and it's about a UFO and an alien in a craft, a UFO craft in the shape of a pyramid. And I thought it was kind of odd, you know, whatever. I just thought it was a strange shape for a UFO craft. I mean, since when would you want to do that? But we're dealing with symbolism here, and I just discovered this morning while taking a shower a new symbolism. So here's the patent, and you can go see it online. I have a copy on my website that you can also download, so long as it's still there. And it's assigned to the Secretary of the Navy, of all things. And there's the pyramidal shape standing on its edge. And it comes up, as I brought up once before, the staccato wedges. And this is in time. This is a timeline, an oscilloscope timeline. So time is moving to the right, and the baseline of the oscilloscope tracing is in the middle. I believe it's in the middle. Wait a minute, let's check on that. Yes, it's directly in the middle, that's right. And it's the numbers, the values, the amplitude values, top and bottom, are something on the order of 1,000, a little over 1,000, let's say 12 or 1,400. So we got the blue, I believe, is voltage, and the red is amperage. And that's the way I designed it. I designed it to have a 1.67 relationship between voltage and current. That's just something I decided to do. Out of habit, really, because that's the way the twin AC motors in my RAV4 EV from 2002 are designed, to be fed that kind of proportionality between voltage and current. So whether or not that's something that should be done this way is a whole nother matter. So what happens is you get this long, excuse me, I got a cough. You get this long buildup, because this is all reactive power. If we do a close-up of this, really get in here, somewhere in this vicinity, you know, where it's peaking, or maybe down here where the voltage and amperage are more in alignment, and we zoom in there, because we can do all kinds of things in a simulator, then we get this, sorry, I have a bad voice. We get this, the red is current, and the blue is voltage. Wow, this is horrible. I can't even talk anymore. Oh, I'll sing. No, that doesn't help. We get this 180-degree difference in time, phase relation, difference in time, separation. So this is the most amount of reactance you can get in an AC. These are triangle waves. These are triangular waves. I'll show you what happens here. What happens is you get this, the sine wave generator feeds a sine wave into the circuit, and then you get piggyback riding on the sine wave, these triangular waves that build in amplitude and frequency. You see, this is a lot more frequency than this. Dwarfing the sine wave, eventually making it look like the sine wave's not even there. It has to be there for this to be built on it. So you have to have the constant input, but it's like a microvolt. It's like nothing. But you're reacting off of it. And because this is lightly loaded, now this is standard information. This is nothing new. You know, the funny part about it, this is not new news, but electrical engineers ignore this because as far as motor design goes, it's useless. But this is not a motor. This is a UFO propulsion device, so it's okay to have lots of reactive power, okay? So when you have a lightly loaded circuit, such as this is, the power has nowhere to go except build up to the sky, build up to infinity. And so you have to figure out how to regulate it. But it builds, and it doesn't get spent until the spark gap in the circuit fires off. Here's the spark gap. It fires off, I believe in this case, it's 6,000 times per second, because it has a 20,000 cycles per second input on the sine wave of 3 volts. Yet, that's the sine wave. The triangular waves are speeding up, and there's something else entirely. I can't remember what they are, but they're speeding up. So when we go, if we shimmy down here to the next image, it just shows a different image in time as it, this is an 800 nanosecond duration of a surge fed by a 2 megahertz input. So this is a different circuit that I did this example. So I used 2 megahertz as my input, but that's the sine wave. The triangular wave is even higher than that. And then this is a 10 microsecond duration of the same surge. It's just taken further out along. I'm moving away. So the whole thing is shrinking, and we get to take in a larger view. So here's the beginning of that, down in here somewhere is the sine wave. Actually, this is the sine wave. And then it starts to turn into these triangle waves. And now, at 20 microseconds, it's already turned into Gabriel's trumpet. There's an article on Wikipedia called Gabriel's Trumpet, in which the surface is greater than the volume of the... Go figure, you know? The surface is something like infinite, while the volume is finite. It's like... or something like that. Or it's the other way around. I forget. I think the surface is finite and the volume is infinite. It's a very strange... It's a summation of... oh, there's a whole other article. Yeah, it's called... oh my gosh, I should have downloaded that one to prepare. But that's... that's another topic. Is Gabriel's trumpet. I don't want to get side-winked here. Okay. So the thing just keeps building and building. And finally, the simulator maxed out. It couldn't handle it anymore. Where can I find that? Let's see. It might be in here. No, it's not. Yeah, I bet it's in here. Yeah, I bet it's in here. So I have this other place I go to. See, this is where I go to. And then let's see, texts. And let's do parametric excitation. So I have this reprint. Infinity is weird. No, it's not here. Yeah, infinity is weird in, yeah, it's not here. Sorry. Alright, let's try Nikola Tesla. It's not here either. I wonder where I put it. Oh, I know where I put it. Okay, I have to go to, where is it? Where are you? Oh, I just type in archive, that'll do it. So at archive.org, oh, here it is, I got it right here. Infinity is weird, even in infinite reactance. So I wrote this piece, and it's off of an article that's linked at the very bottom of the Wikipedia article on infinity mirrors, and it's only 6-page long article. Yeah, infinity is weird, even in infinite reactance. And it talks about Gabriel's trumpet and whatnot. Oh, and there is a circuit example. and some equations. So this equation is interesting because, let's see, where are we here? Zoom in. This equation is, oops, maybe zoom in a little more. Okay. There are different equations that talk about Gabriel's trumpet. And this is the one that's interesting because it's an infinite series. It goes to infinity. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. So, let's see. The whole point of this video, though, is something I haven't even gotten to yet. So here we got the pyramids, okay? And it turns out, I forgot about this. I've always had this notion, but I never thought much of it because until I saw this movie, Stargate, I thought, well, you know what? The pyramid symbolism is really important. It's in the patent, and it's in the staccato, the staccato wedge-shaped surges, but it's also in another place. In order for this circuit to work, you have to have a minimum of 5 coils, and that's the pyramid, the 5 points of a pyramid. You know, you've got the apex of the pyramid, and then you have the base, the square base. Well, in this style circuitry, I call it a reactive motor, shall we say, or a reactive generator, because it's very good at creating reactance from very little input. In this particular example, it's humongous. And it's all because of what I like to call the heaviside correction, is putting in a transformer with a capacitor across it, you know. Anyway, didn't go down far enough. Okay, so it's over 442 gigawatts appearing at the transformer versus 45 nanowatts appearing at the sine wave generator. A gain of 10 or 9, actually it's closer to 10, 9.8, 10 quadrillion to 1. Talk about a COP, a coefficient of performance. Well, there's certain requirements to make this thing work. And the one that's this video motivates the making of this video is the pyramidal quantity and arrangement or relationship of the coils. And these coils amplify. Well, first what has to happen is we have to have inversion of voltage. 180 degrees difference between, you know, triangular waves building on the sine wave, in which the voltage and the amperage are pulled apart from being in sync, 0 degrees difference, you know, they're in phase, they're in synchronicity in real power, if this was to be real power, but we pull it apart the maximum amount, half a cycle, 180 degrees separation between the amperage and the voltage, to create the most extreme reactance possible before the whole thing disassembles and we don't have electricity anymore. So this is still electricity, but it's reactive power. It's called negative unity or negative reactance, because positive is when it's in sync, and then when it's 90 degrees out of phase, like in a coil or in a capacitor, that's like halfway getting to this point, but we go all the way. And we do it by inverting the voltage. Because out in creation, in the universe, reactance floats around as monopoles. They're not related. You need a circuit to put it together. But usually we put it together as real power, in which all these waves are in phase. And then I go and pull it apart. And of course it just builds, because as Jim Murray says, it's standard in motors and generators. He has what he calls a transforming generator, if you look it up. If you have a motor that's lightly loaded or a generator, it always will surge to infinite gain and destroy itself. But I go and I put a spark gap in here, which fires off so many times, you know, creating pulses, these staccato wedges of pulsation, of rise and fall of energy. Because it's when the spark gap fires, it collapses this staccato wedge, preventing it from surging to infinite gain, and safeguarding the integrity of the existence of the circuit that is hosting this phenomenon. And then it starts to build again. But because of the warm-up period, it doesn't collapse all the way to 0. It collapses down to a value that's reasonable, like nanowatts or something, and then starts to build and escalate again. And it's a logarithmic escalation. See, it just keeps building at an exponential rate of accelerated rise of amplitude in both directions, the positive and negative direction on the oscilloscope tracing, because it's going actually up and down. And the up and down gets more faster, and it more extensive in the up and down tracing on the oscilloscope. So in order to start this, though, you need a four diode full rectifier bridge, taking the AC sine wave and feeding it into a capacitor. That's what you have to do. Whoops. That didn't work. Okay. And that inverts the voltage. How? Well, the diodes are forcing the current into this capacitor. And so the current gets loaded up on the top side here. And the charge on the capacitor has nowhere to go. It's because it's never allowed to discharge, because the current is being forced in a singular direction. So the thing never gets a reverse direction to allow the capacitor to discharge back out again. So what happens? Well, the capacitor is 1 millifarad in this case. Eventually it gets saturated, and then it blows its top, because the diodes are only forcing current. They don't do anything to the voltage. So the voltage is allowed to relax, but not the current. But it's the current that's going to discharge this thing, because it's current that put the charge into here in the first place, because current moves voltage around. Well, when this thing is being fed current, after it's already been saturated, it literally explodes and discharges, not current because it's not allowed to, it discharges voltage at an amplitude of voltage greater than what's feeding this. So every time this thing is force-feeding current in one direction but oscillates its voltage, this thing decides, okay, I have to get rid of my current the only way I know how. I have to get rid of it via voltage. And not, you would think it'd be off cycle, but it's not. You know, you would think that when the voltage goes this way, okay, when the voltage goes the other way, no, because it's not allowed to discharge current. So when the voltage is oriented this way, and regardless of the fact that the voltage is going back and forth, when the voltage is going this way and when the current is going this way, that's when this thing explodes with voltage greater than what's coming in order to try to discharge itself. But it's not discharging current. So it never loses its charge because it's not allowed to. It's not allowed to move current out of itself, to discharge itself. It merely explodes with a voltage discharge greater than the voltage that's being fed it. And that's what causes the rise in voltage. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful system, the way this thing works. So now we get a rise of voltage and a rise of frequency as well. And that voltage piles up on these coils over here. These I like to call my current coils because they're small henries, 2 microhenry coils. And these I like to call my voltage coils because they have 1 henry of inductance. So it's if this were 1 microhenry, that would be 1/millionth of a henry of inductance. So it's 500,000 times less inductance on these 2 coils as compared to these 2 coils. Now these 4 coils are considered lumped coils. So if you got an air core structure, no core to it, you put these coils on there in close proximity so that they have a 99% coupling coefficient. It has to be maximum. It can't be 98. That's an unfortunate stipulation of this circuit. Now the resistance on those coils, if I can find out where I wrote it down here, it's not just any old wire. It has to be specific gauge wire. The voltage coils is 30 Ogg, and the current coils are 10 Ogg. Well, 10 Ogg is pretty heavy. So we don't want much resistance here. I'm sorry. Oh, we don't want much resistance here, so we use 10 Ogg wire, which is very stout wire. And then we want 30 Ogg wire on these two coils. So these coils are going to have more resistance because we want resistance here. In fact, we even put a resistor here. Resistance is our friend here, but resistance is our enemy here. So if it becomes a problem, in this area of the circuit, resistance becomes a problem, we have two options. We can either have multiple wires, bundled wires, to reduce the resistance of our solder joints, or we can weld our connections to have no resistance in the joints connecting the various areas of the circuit greater than the wire being used, or the connections on the components for that matter. We weld them. That's one way to do it. Oh, sorry, I'm covering the camera. So here we want voltage build up because we're going to have high voltage, low current over here. We're going to have high current, low voltage over here. And because all of these are lumped together, it becomes like a transformer situation because they're tightly coupled. And so we've created our own step-up versus step-down transformer. So the voltage is coming out of this thing, feeding all of this, mostly reacting over here, building up over here. And because this is a step-down situation, current starts to build up over here. So now we got a lot of current building up because we get voltage. All this thing, this poor little guy over here is increasing its voltage output greater than what we're feeding it with the sine wave generator, 3 volts. This thing is reacting with a greater degree of reactant voltage, and it's feeding these coils over here, which is stepping it down and distributing it to a high current over here. So now we got lots of current and lots of voltage from nowhere. But it's all reactive power. According to electrical engineers, it's useless, but that's okay, because we're not trying to rotate a rotor with reference to a stator in an electric motor. We're just trying to neutralize moment of inertia. So I already covered that in the other video. I'm not going to cover it here. This is just the circuitry, because here's our pyramid. So we need a 5th coil to make this work, and that's our transfer coil. I like to call it the transfer coil. So here's the transfer. This is the peak, the apex of the pyramid is this 5th coil. And it's a 2 microhenry coil, just like the other 2 current coils. And then we have a 200 nano. Is that nano? Yeah. So we have a coil here, 1/10 the size of this one, and it's on this side of a transformer, and the other side is 10 henries. And that's a little unreasonable, obviously. But that's the way I did the simulation. So this is ideal. Obviously, under ideal conditions, you get quadrillion COP, coefficient of performance. So obviously, when you build it, you're not going to get the same results, but that's okay. How much power does it take? This is an excess, far more than what was probably required. And then we have a capacitor. This really works well. This is 1/10 of a millifarad, so that would be 100 microfarad capacitor. Short out the 2 sides of the transformer with this capacitor. It really works well to boost the power. And then to put a little resistor in here, that's I like to call ballast, because one of the problems is to make sure this spark gap fires. Because if it doesn't fire, the whole thing will escalate to infinite gain and blow itself up. So you have to make sure the spark gap fires on time, or else those staccato wedges will blow up this thing. And so I call these ballasts because they help stabilize and ensure the firing of the circuit. There's one over here, resistor, acting as a ballast, and there's one here, and then there's one down here. So I have 3 different ballasts to make sure this thing fires. And they're just a 1 ohm resistor. It really didn't matter what size resistor, so I might as well make it 1 ohm. That seems to work best, so as not to modify the proportionality between voltage and current. So that's the pyramid I wanted to mention in this video. The 4 coils over here. Let's see, let's move this over. The 4 coils over here, and the apex of that base pyramid is the transfer coil over here. Now this transfer coil is on here as part of the lumped set of inductors, all 5. I just have to write it here in the schematic because that's the way the simulator works. But in my lumping, I already have that relationship specified in the simulation, but I have to describe it to you so that you know that this coil up here And these 4 coils over here are all on the same air core structure or armature. Now there's something else interesting. Notice it's a pair of voltage coils and a pair of current coils. It has to be a minimum of 2 each. That's why this is a pyramidal circuit. And I'm beginning to wonder now if that's why the pyramid architecture is so ancient, going back to the days of Atlantis. Because if you read the book, where is it? A Dweller on Two Planets, also known as The Dividing of the Way by Philos the Tibetan. He's supposedly a Venusian who, through automatic writing and through telepathy, gave the text of the book to the amanuensis, Frederick S. Oliver, who lived in the latter decades of the 1800s. He died very young, at the age of 22 or something, and then his mom published the book through an LA publishing house. And there was one mistake in the text, one grievous mistake, in which the publisher wanted to sell extra copy, so he made up a story. See, in the book, the soulmate, the soul is not some human who's that special human that, you know, you're fated to be with because you have such similarity of consciousness that you really get along like peachy keen, like 2 peas in a pod. That's nice. That's, you know, karma, that many lifetimes, over many lifetimes, 2 people keep incarnating together, and so they come to like each other. They're so familiar with each other, they love to be with each other. Okay, that's okay, but that's not what the book had in the text. It had the soul's mate. Possessive souls, soul-s. The soul's mate is the higher self, the guardian angel. That's what the text originally said. So the publisher changed that to sell more copy. And it kind of, that's 120 years ago. It started this trend, oh, the soul's mate, as if there's only one definition. There's actually at least 3 definitions to the soul's mate, or soulmate. 3rd definition is when a soul incarnates twice at the same time. 2 different minds in 2 different bodies. Christopher Marlowe and Elizabeth I, Queen of England, is one example of a binary incarnation. And the purpose of it is to get rid of a lot of karma twice as fast, basically. When you don't have yoga, and you're trying to do good, you know, in the world, and live out all your shit and not reenact more shit, but instead do good, then you incarnate twice to live out a double dosage of karma and to create a double dosage of good karma at the same time. And so you're trying to speed up your evolution the only way you know how. So that's another version of soulmate. And then a 3rd version, actually, is enlightenment, when the soul, the version that was originally in this text, the soul's mate, the higher self, unites with the higher self and unifies, creating a unity between the soul and the higher self, the guardian angel, the Atma. The divine, what would God be if God lived inside of us? It would be the higher self. We already have it. So all we have to do is try to tune into it. And Charlie Luce would say, there's 2 bonds the soul has. The soul binds with the higher self through the gold thread, and it binds with the body at the heart with the silver thread. And it just turns out that the material, atomic material of gold and silver, actually helps strengthen those 2 connections that the soul has with the higher self and the lower self. Because basically the soul connects with the mind in the heart through the silver thread. The silver cord is the other expression. So the book is very interesting. So it has a history of Atlantis, and they built pyramids there too. And when Atlantis was about to sink, refugees, 10% of the planet left in all compass directions, according to Charlie Lutz, 75,000 years ago. And if you radiocarbon date the Cheops pyramid, it's 71,000 years ago, but they threw that away because they thought, oh, that's ridiculous. It couldn't have been built 71,000 years ago. Cover all this. So Atlantis also had transmutation of matter. And they had a lot, because Atlantis was a semi-tropical continental island in the middle of the Atlantic, they had a lot of rivers, they had a lot of rain. And they had to dredge the rivers at the harbor points constantly. So they had all this shale that they were dredging from the bottom of the rivers, what do you do with it? Why not feed it into your transmutation device to turn it into whatever you want? And they were really big on aluminum. They had everything. They had a mile-high spire, a tower, that also served as their lightning rod for their capital city, because they had a lot of thunderstorms and they wanted to, you know, get rid of the lightning, so they had this mile-high lightning rod. It was made out of aluminum. You could take an elevator or stairs, if you preferred, all the way to the top, just like an Eiffel Tower situation, and look out the windows at the top. But it was made out of aluminum. They're really big on aluminum. Well, they made all their craft out of aluminum, and I covered yesterday how that's important for paramagnetism. You can't have any iron in the UFO. But going back to transmutation, the octahedron, which is two pyramids united at their base, I believe that's how they did transmutation, because if you examine the faces, if you turn in your mind the faces into a gear, and the opposite, and it's linked, and there's an axle, so this is one wheel or gear, and the axle goes through to the opposite side, you'll find that the two wheels move in perfect synchronicity in the same direction. In this case, this direction, but it's you write it in the opposite direction because you're looking at it from the opposite direction. But it's two wheels going in the same direction on the same axle, and you have four of them through the center of the 8 planes, because there are 8 surfaces to an octahedron, and they're in pairs of 4. Now we think of Cartesian coordinate system as 3 dimensions, but here we compress things a little bit into 4 dimensions. But the significance is adjacent faces do not grind, they mesh. So here, this one's going this way, and look at this one's going this way. And so now we have a flow between them going this way. So they don't grind against each other, they mesh. So all these wheels turn. So I would imagine, because in this book they describe how they did transmutation. They took shale and they raised its vibratory rate, because according to them, the periodic chart of the elements is nothing more than a difference in frequency between the elements. In other words, it's an electromagnetic, or I should say an electrodynamic definition to matter. And Franco Cordelletti over in the Portuguese-speaking area of Brazil, who's on Quora, he's the only guy besides me who's a follower of Eric Dollard. And so we kind of, you know, help each other out and read each other's posts and upvote them. But we both think alike. But he's an electrical engineer. He's trained. I'm not. I'm just a wannabe journalist studying the thing to share it with other lay people like yourself, like myself, you, in terms that I can understand, but also using the vernacular of electrical engineering, because it's their language, so why not use it? Don't make up something like Tesla did and confuse everyone. Radiant power, well, that's reactive power. Oliver Heaviside before him already coined the term. Charles Proteus Steinmetz after Tesla, and also in his time, continued to use reactants as the terminology, but Tesla had to come up with his own vernacular because he was a showman. He wanted to show off and show off how smart he was. The guy was in and out of enlightenment. He didn't become enlightened, but he was slipping in and out of enlightenment. He was that close to becoming enlightened that he was already experiencing it on an episodic fashion, kind of like me. I'll have to come back another lifetime because I'm certainly not solidifying it. Anyway, so in this book they talk about transmutation of the elements, and they say they would raise the vibratory rate of the shale that they dredged out of the bottom of their port, harbor, river openings that came out into the Atlantic, and then take that shale, and at the price of the smelting of copper ore, they would raise its vibratory rate using a methodology similar to an inductive furnace. Now, an inductive furnace, you put a metal object inside a strong electromagnetic field, it starts to induce magnetism in that piece, that hunk of metal. And you can actually get it up to red hot, orange hot, white hot, and melt it. And so they said it was a similar principle. But I think what they were using was 4 axes of electromagnetism, probably in combination with electrostatics, probably reactive power, because you want to shake things up and destroy everything. So why would you want to use real power? You'd want to use reactive power. But 4 axes of rotation to break up the atomic structure of that shale and turn it into light. And then they would bring down the vibratory rate from light to the vibratory rate they wanted it to end up as. And so if they wanted aluminum or pure gold or whatever, they would be able to create pure silicon, whatever they wanted, pure sodium. They could bring it down and create that out of the original material. Now, in our case, we have so much hazardous waste on this planet. I would suggest we start with that first before we start dealing with dirt. Get rid of all the hazardous waste. Good way to get rid of it. Turn it into something else. And there will be no residual remaining of the original material because it was turned into light first as the intermediate step. So the original material is gone. It was turned into light. And so, again, we have this pyramid image of two pyramids in transmutation. So between UFOs having one image of the pyramid and another of transmutation of the elements, it's like, good grief. It's no wonder they built pyramids in Atlantis and brought it over to Giza and started building more pyramids while they still had the technology to do so before they lost it. Hey, that's 75,000 years ago. So the prior Yuga, the Treta Yuga, the average lifespan, you see, according to Vedic philosophy, we are in the Kali Yuga where the average lifespan, if we're lucky, is 100 years. But in the Treta Yuga, which ended 5,000 years ago with the death of Krishna and also the beginning of the Jewish calendar, I might add, the prior Yuga, the Treta Yuga, the average lifespan was 1,000 years on average. So in the Bible, when it says Methuselah was 1,000 years old, and then Enoch, it was started to diminish. By the time it got to Enoch, it was only 300. Yeah, that was the leading up to the junction between the Treta Yuga and the Kali Yuga. Treta meaning three, the third Yuga. Kali is the fourth. So in the Treta Yuga, they had plenty of time to develop their sciences. They had aeons of time because they had no intellect. We have an intellect, a reasoning mind that was developed in Greece of all places because that was one of the areas of refugee escapement from Atlantis. We went in all directions. The Mayans, all sorts of cultures got built up as a result of people fleeing Atlantis. But it was in Greece that the rational mind, according to Charlie Lutz, was planted, the reasoning mind. And then it just spread all over the planet. It just radiated, and everybody started to get a reasoning mind. But prior to Greece, ancient Greece, Atlantis had no reasoning mind. They had intuition, and they had experience, and they had long lifespans, and also not just individually, but a long span of time for the development of their culture. Our culture, my God, our cultures never last Kali Yuga because we have no memory. We can't remember anything. But they retained everything. And so they built up through trial and error and intuition because they operated very close to nature. They were able to be taught by the intelligences of nature how to do things. Charlie Lutz would say, go into the garden or go to the park and just sit there and relax and see what happens. See what comes into your brain because when you're in nature relaxing in a relaxed state, the intelligence of nature can get to you and start feeding you information. And you start to learn things about all kinds of things. Einstein used to take his walks in the Alps. It's a very common thing. There are other ways to contact nature, but my favorite one is to take a long bath. And I'm getting in touch with the water element. And so I get to experience bliss eventually after an hour or two in the bath. Who wouldn't? Before you get cold. So it's very easy to contact bliss, and then all this information starts to come in from, from wherever. It just comes. So we get this pyramidal shape that seems to be so significant. And now I can see why. Because this reactive style circuit needs 5 coils to amplify the reversive voltage, the separation between voltage and current here at this capacitor. It has to amplify it somehow. And so it does it with the 4 base, the square base set of coils, and the pyramidal apex. Now, if you only have 1 coil here as your current coil and 2 over here as your voltage coils, it doesn't work. You need a minimum of 2 each. Now you can have up to 8 current coils before the benefit of adding an additional coil starts to drop off. And you can have a maximum of 3 voltage coils before, when you adding a 4th coil, the benefit starts to trail off. But the minimum is 2 each. And that's why the circuit is like, you could almost say, a pyramidal architecture to its amplification section. So we have the amplification section of 5 coils. We have the spark gap to prevent it from amplifying to infinite gain. And then we have the 4-bridge rectifier feeding the sine waves into a capacitor to invert voltage, to pile up voltage and cause it to explode with voltage greater than what it's receiving, and to feed these voltage coils, which then step it down into current in the current coils to evenly distribute, so we don't just get a buildup of voltage. A lot of the problems I had in teaching myself reactive circuits on various simulators is you can get this humongous voltage and no current. It's like it's useless. You got to have some current. But this step-down transformer situation solved that problem because it ensured that I got both current and voltage in a mixed state. Here it's high voltage, low current. Here it's high current, low voltage, but it all mixes together because it's all, see, this is a short between these pair of coils. Sorry, I live across the street from Walmart. That's just the way it is. The high current, low voltage is shorted out. I used to call this a shorted motor. Back to the high voltage, low current set of coils. And by the way, this is actually no voltage, high current, because you've inverted voltage here. So the current keeps going in the same direction, but it's not moving away from areas of high voltage. Now it's moving towards areas of high voltage because the phase shift of the voltage has been inverted. So that depletes voltage over here to the point that it's 0. It ends up being 0 voltage here, and it's all current. Here you get a little bit of current, but you get mostly voltage. But in the rest of the circuit, it blends, and you get a mixture of both because it's shorted out. So it's a motor, it's a shorted motor. I mean, it's really a bizarre design. You know, I started with an ice cream motor I took out of, oh, that's what I should show you. Oh, yeah. A picture of an ice cream motor. Well, we can use, where did I put that? Oh, I know where I put it. Here, we'll use this one. I started out, I actually took a motor out of an ice cream churning machine, the kind that has a bucket, and then the churner, the motor's on top, and the paddle that churns is underneath. Let's see, it's, I think, at the bottom here. Here it is. Is this it? Wiring scheme? No. Oh, where is it? Is this it? No, that's not it. Let's see. Nope, that's not it. That's actually from an Eric Dollard video. I thought it was here. Darn it. I have a graphic that shows the difference between welding their connections versus soldering them. And it has a picture of the motor that I used from the ice cream machine. Oh, motor hints. Here we go. This is it. So we'll do the welded version and the soldered version. So this is the welded version. So assuming that you use 10-AUG wire to connect the circuit, this is pretty much the same thematic circuit as before, and use 10-AUG wire to connect to, see, these are, what are these called? See, a motor has starter coils. These are starter coils that loop to themselves, and they're very stout copper wire, and they're not insulated. That's the funny part. And you connect the circuit using 10-AUG, and then use another branch of 10-AUG to go to the other pair of current coils. This is actually one coil that loops twice, and one current. So this is where I got my current coils from, is from the starter coils on an electric ice cream motor. And then the main voltage coils I took here, and then I split them in half and made them bifilar to be rewound as 30 Og. And I'm assuming, just by the dimensionality of these current coils, that these are 10 Og wire already. So I used 10 Og to connect them together, and then 30 Og to connect the voltage coil to the remainder of the circuit. So I was just adapting my simulation to that of a motor. I was just taking a motor and thinking, well, how can I change this? And then add a circuit to it to make it into something useful. And this is all coming out of my work with simulation of Joseph Newman motor, because this is actually what I started with. No, this is what I veered into after I'd already successfully simulated the Joseph Newman motor at a high frequency. That's the problem. That's what makes it over unity, not size. You don't make it any bigger. You have to increase the frequency by taking out the bar magnets in the center and replacing it with canisters of helium wrapped with an open coil. But then you I kept modifying that, and I got to this point here. And I had to take values, parameters off of something in real life, and so I used an ice cream motor. So here's the rotor. Now a rotor, the coupling coefficient between the rotor, and this is the stator armature, and inside here is the rotor armature. The relationship, the magnetic coupling between the rotor and the stator this is a moving part, and the stator is stationary, varies between, I want to say, 10% coupling coefficient minimum and 70% or 50 to 70% maximum. As it rotates, it changes. Well, in my circuit design, it's fixed. It doesn't change. The rotor is locked. And I found that only at 10% coupling coefficient will the spark gap fire. If you go any higher to like anywhere, like even 11% coupling coefficient on up, I tested up to 50%, the spark gap will not fire. And of course you get an over unity explosion. You don't want that. So for some odd reason, the simulation had to be fixed at exactly 10% coupling coefficient between the rotor and the stator. But I basically took it off of a motor. I simply modified a motor. I took a picture of this in the bathroom because that's the only place where I had bright light, and then did a little, artistic rendering of attaching a circuit to it. So here's the full bridge rectifier feeding the capacitor. Here I have a battery to suppress voltage buildup here, because if you don't, a lot of voltage builds up. So for a different situation, maybe you want to suppress voltage buildup, but for a UFO propulsion device, you wouldn't want that. So you want to ignore that little battery there. So here's the capacitor building up voltage on one side, being fed these diodes on the top here. And here's this capacitor in parallel with the spark gap helps to ensure that the spark gap fires. And then this is what I used as a voltage divider to reduce the voltage being fed into this thing. Because one of the problems we have is that, and this is the Ferrante effect problem, is we feed too much voltage to our circuitry, to our motors. And it suppresses the opportunity for reactance to occur. We don't want reactance to occur, apparently. But in my case, I do. I want a maximum of reactance. So I have to bring down, that's why the sine wave generator, I found that I think a maximum of 10 volts was the safety net, and a minimum of 1 microvolt, which a microvolt is how much a whip antenna, a yard-long whip of a piece of a wire, your whip antenna, is sufficient to power a crystal radio set from the 1920s. So it doesn't take much. That's why it looks like somebody could say, oh, energy from the vacuum, energy from the atmosphere, aerial power. No, that's just the stimulant. That's not the energy that runs this thing. This thing creates its own energy in time based on reacting off of the teensy-weensy stimulus you feed it. But it has to be teensy-weensy because it cannot overwhelm the reactance. The reactance, it's like building a fire. You start with tinder, and then you go to small twigs, and then small branches, and then you put on big logs. You have to start small. If you start putting on logs, you're not going to start a fire. In Boy Scouts, we're required for our merit badge on fire starting. We don't have to use the Native American method, but we do have to. We're given one match, and if we can't cook dinner, we're going to go without dinner or eat food cold if we can't start a fire to cook our dinner with only one match. So you learn, okay? You start with tinder, dry grass, tinder, and then you build it up. Well, that's why you cannot feed this style circuitry any large amount of voltage, because you're going to suppress the opportunity for reactance to occur. You got to have the circuit to create reactance, but you got to have very teensy-weensy voltage to make sure reactance happens in the first place, because it's happening from whatever level of voltage you're feeding it. And if you feed it too much voltage, it ain't going to happen. I mean, trust me, let's just say it's going to be so difficult, it'll be mind-blowing to try to make it happen. So why make it hard for yourself? So you reduce the voltage. So if you want less than 3 volts, let's say you've got an output from your sine wave generator of 3 volts and you want something less than that, you use a voltage divider. And you put a capacitor at the tail end of your sine wave generator going to ground, and then the end that feeds, you pass it through a, in this case it's a 1 ohm resistor, but then you have another resistor bleeding off to another ground, all of your excess voltage, 1 kilo ohm. Now there's an interesting property about voltage and about resistance and voltage. They're a direct correlation. So when you increase voltage, you increase resistance. When you increase resistance, you increase voltage. Normally. when you're dealing in phase, when you're out of phase, it's completely something else. But when you're in phase, and that's what the sine wave generator is initially, feeding a real power stimulus into here, resistors, if you want more voltage, you add more resistance. Well, you want to bleed off your excess voltage because you don't want to overwhelm this thing with too much voltage. So you have a 1K ohm resistor bleeding off excess voltage. You have a 1 ohm resistor feeding into this thing. So you're reducing the voltage input by a factor of 1,000 to 1. You're reducing the voltage by 1,000 times. So if your sine wave generator is putting out 3 volts, you're going to get maybe 3 millivolts coming into this thing. In this case, this 10K, what is that? 10K to 100K. So the frequency on this is anywhere between 10K and 100K. I've gone as high as 200K and oftentimes usually as low as 20K cycles per second. And what does it say? It says 3 volts. It looks like 3 volts. Because when you look at digital sine wave generators on Amazon, they put out 3 volts. I think, though, a digital sine wave generator is not going to work. Unfortunately, I think it has to be a rotary device. It has to be a true generator, a mechanical generator, because I think a digital generator won't work. That's my presumption. At the time, I didn't know any better, but after some time of working with the circuit, I realized a digital sine wave generator may not work at all. It may have to be a real generator that you rotate with a real tiny toy motor, you know, because it's a tiny little thing. It's only putting out a few volts, but it has to be fast. Now, in order to be that high a frequency, though, it can't be your standard generator. And Tesla had a patent that Ernst Alexanderson stole and repatented and became famous. He called it his rotary generator. And Marconi, who also stole radio from Tesla and warped it into something else, what we have today, they worked together as a team. Why not? 2 thieves. And they had to produce hundreds of thousands of cycles per second to feed their radio transmission, broadcasting. To do that, they could not use a normal standard generator. They had to use a disc. Well, Tesla used a disc with radial serrated grooves on either side of the disc. And you spin the disc, and you're able to create very high alternating current. Ernst Alexanderson put slots around the perimeter of the disc. So they were just, instead of it being a flat disc at the very perimeter, it was little, he cut slots in, radial slots, and that created his high-frequency alternating current. And you can get it up to like hundreds of thousands of cycles per second. So it is possible to have a generator, a mechanical generator, create hundreds of thousands of cycles per second output. So whether a digital will work, which would be great for us because it's very convenient, digital sine wave generator output is a device from Amazon. It's just a few bucks. My God, it's inexpensive. And its input is 9 to 12 volts. And reviewers have said that if you only feed it 9, you don't get a very consistent wave output. You have to feed it 12 volts. So you're figuring on a 12-volt input to run this circuit, basically. And yet the output is humongous because it's all reactive power, because it's lightly loaded. Only the components, this is what makes it lightly loaded, is the components of the circuit itself. You're not trying to drive anything because this is an imaginary set of components that is not a true motor. If you try to rotate this, you get resistance. You get mechanical resistance, which translates into inductive resistance, and then you have to beef up what you're feeding it. Well, obviously, if you're going to run an electric motor in an electric car, you got to feed it a humongous amount of voltage to get it to move. But in this style circuitry, we're not trying to rotate a motor anymore. I just use this as my basis to grow and evolve the circuit out of this. But that doesn't mean I'm trying to run a motor with this. There is a type of motor you can run with this, and it's an ultrasonic vibrator, in which you have a plunger with solenoid coils. At high rapid rate, you're plunging a hydraulic vessel filled with fluid. And then you use Tesla's bladeless turbine along with his valvular conduit, his one-way valves, solid-state one-way valves, to translate that ultrasonic vibration of the fluid into rotary or into circular motion of the fluid, which can then rotate the planes, the discs of the Tesla turbine, to create rotation of the tires. And you can step down the vibratory rate that the circuit is feeding that so that the tires can rotate at the appropriate slower rate using baffles in the conduit of fluid. So there are ways of converting this circuit into an EV situation, an electric car situation. It's just, ideally, that's not the best use of its power. The best use of its power is as a UFO power supply. That's what I wanted to bring out in this particular... let's see, the other one, this is the solder joints. So this comes from Eric Dollard, courtesy of Eric Dollard. You saw a flash of that picture once before. When you can't weld, to overcome the resistance of the solder joints, you just make multiple connections, many, many wires. And of course, it gets all bunched up and cramped up, and it's hard to fit it in. So now you got to redesign the thing to accommodate a huge bundle of wires that you've got, you know, feeding your various connections so that you don't have any resistance at your solder joints. But otherwise, if you want to avoid that kind of problem, you just make your connections welded and avoid solder joints altogether. I think that completes this. I wasn't as fully prepared as I should have been, but I did the best I could. But I wanted to bring out this extra symbolism of pyramidal symbolism because I had no idea it's so extensive. It really is a significant symbol, or else the Egyptians wouldn't have used it. Now, there are other properties we know. You know, you study pyramid power, you find out those things. But as a symbol, it carries over to this circuit. So it's not a symbol anymore. It actually is necessary to amplify the circuit with a pyramidal arrangement of coils. A transfer coil, a very low inductance in relationship to these coils over here of 10% or less. With the voltage coils, it's 10%. With the current coils, it's even less than that because the current coils are so tiny. But the voltage coils being stronger, that's the ones I worry about, and so it cannot be anything other than 10% between the transfer coil and the two voltage coils. And then you got strong coupling among the four coils that forms the base of this pyramidal arrangement of coils. So it's unbelievable. Who would have known that I'd learn this, get this out of a movie? Now, there's one other movie I want to show you, and that's Explorers, in which a very young Ethan Hawke and River Phoenix, and also Jason Preston is there. There's River Phoenix, and there's Ethan Hawke. This was made in 1985, 10 years prior to this one. 10 years prior. And here these teenagers are making their own little UFO craft because an alien in Ethan Hawke's dream gives him the circuitry, and River Phoenix is the whiz guy who knows how to deal with it and do something with it. Ethan Hawke is just the receiver. And they use the German term, I can't pronounce it, of neutralization of inertia, which is used in the movie, but it's also used in William Lyne's book, Occult Ether Physics, because that's the word the Germans used during the Nazi era of World War II when they were designing and building their UFO craft. So this is all based on Tesla invented this while he was still going to school, the concept. He built a UFO and tooted around the New York skyline at night out of his lab. He got into he converted a potbelly stove. Now, if you look up online, you can find potbelly stoves that are made out of pure aluminum alone. There's no cast iron in them at all. And this is what blew me away. I thought, well, how can he do this? It has to be made out of aluminum. There can't be any iron in this device. So how can there be? And then I looked and found there are potbelly stoves made out of aluminum. So it was just big enough for him to get into it. And he turned it into his test vehicle to test out his theory. He built it and ran it. So he invented UFO technology. The Germans stole it from him when they burned down his lab in 1895 to hide the theft of his liquefied air. And then they had it, they worked on it for half a century, and then they used it during World War II, the Foo Fighters, and then we got it during Operation Paperclip, transferred to us at the end of the war, and we've had it ever since. But we claim aliens gave it to us. Well, that's just to, you know, take the onus of responsibility off our shoulders. So you can't, how can you believe your authority figures when they hide technology from you? When they tell you we're all dying of AIDS, or not AIDS, we're all, oh, that's another thing. Oh, God. I'm sorry, I got to share this with you. 10 years ago, I read an article that blew me away. The HIV virus does not kill gay people. It has nothing to... It was a microbe engineered by the U.S. military and tested on the gay community in San Francisco and New York because they figured they were expendable. Who cares if they die off, you know? Why should society care? So they tested it out on them. They gave it to them. And the only reason why it hurt them was because the gay community was prone to, at that time, hopefully they don't do it anymore, be drug abusers, because that heightened their sexual experience, was to do drugs at the same time. And as anybody knows, when you do alcohol and drugs, it weakens the immune system. You'll come down with anything, much less HIV, or it could be anything. So this whole thing about, oh, HIV in the gay community is bogus. They were just the guinea pigs. And because they were drug abusers, they were the perfect set of guinea pigs because they would be more susceptible than the rest of the population to incur death and sickness and death from the HIV retrovirus. So how can you believe your authority figures that, oh, the COVID virus is killing off people? I had the intuition in the middle of the night. I couldn't sleep. There's no more deaths happening now than a year ago at this time of the year. They're just blowing things up out of proportion. It's ridiculous. I'm sorry. I'm not a factual-oriented guy first. I get the facts afterwards just to get the details straight. I'm an intuitive guy first and a factual guy second. So if it sounds like I'm talking out my ass, okay, so be it. But that's the way I operate, because I want the big picture, and the only way you get the big picture is to use intuition. And then you can use your reasoning mind to work out the details and find out if what you're thinking is bogus or actually real. So I don't know if what I'm saying about this viral scare is real or not. It just feels fake. And a lot of people are saying it, not just me. And it has everything to do with environment, the quality of the air you breathe and in the environment you live in. There are stories of the bubonic plague in Europe in which they actually had a cloud hanging over them at the time. So they were already breathing foul air and dumping their pee and shit and garbage out into the streets, and the rats were, you know, talk about lack of sanitation. So between lack of sanitation and foul air, because when you got moisture in the air, it holds the dust and the dirt and, most importantly, the germs in the air so that everybody gets to inhale it. And it covers everything. Everything you touch is impregnated with the germs from the moisture-laden air, carrying those germs. So it's like, come on, you know? How hard is it to figure out? We got good air quality in the United States, so especially here in Southern California this time of year, all the rain we're getting. How can anybody get sick? Yet everybody's walking around with masks over their faces. It's absurd for us to be worried about it. Anyway, I'm sorry, I can't help it. It's current events. It bothers me because I have to listen to the Walmart loudspeaker over their parking lot blare all day long, and it's disgusting. And it's very hard to. It's bad enough they've got their 18-wheelers, you know, come here, and then they pull in here right across the street from me to make their deliveries to Walmart. It's bad enough I had to get used to that for the last 2 summers when I have to open the windows, but now to be listening to this bogus stuff. I don't listen to the broadcast TV for this reason, because I get so irate over the canned trash that they tell people on the nightly news. I can't imagine anybody wanting to listen to that stuff. So I don't get any broadcast TV. I just watch videos, either disc or tape, because that's my entertainment. And if it's the same stuff I've already watched, then so be it. But the only reason why I know anything these days is because of Quora. I've been on Quora a lot, and I get so angry listening to that stuff. Anyway, enough said. Enough said. I'm going to shut up now.